Consulting, really focus on creating growth mindset oriented development programs, and typically working with senior leaders to develop growth mindset and kind of implement growth mindset type methodologies with their team. So creating that kind of continuous learning culture. So that is a bit about me. In terms of kind of working with Matthew Syed Consulting. So the organization really kind of focuses on growth mindset and learning cultures. And Matthew Syed, who's one of our kind of co-founders, he's basically kind of journalist and author. And he's written a lot about developing growth mindset as individuals and the kind of impact that can have on performance, and also how growth mindset can kind of be inherent in different cultures and what kind of impact that can have on outcomes. So yeah, some good reads there, kind of really linking growth mindset, learning cultures to performance. So that's kind of really what we focus on.
Brilliant, thanks, Emma. That's great. Really good to hear more about your background. I've got to say, we've had the fortune to work with Emma and the Matthew Syed business, and one of the things for me personally, which is why I'm so excited about this call, was after reading Carol Dweck's work, and then it really kind of made sense when I then read Matthew Syed's Black Box Thinking. Was the first point that I kind of got to really seeing how you can apply that practically. So it's been a real joy for me to work and work with Matthew Syed team, and say to have Emma here today. So guys, we're going to be starting the conversation with Emma in a second and going through. If you want to interact, if you want to ask any questions, we love these in conversations to be an interactive forum. So use the chat function. I'll be monitoring throughout the session. Please, if there's anything that obviously Emma's going to share, she's going to share some really insightful stuff. If you want to learn more about that or ask about any questions that are relevant to you or your practice, then please use the chat function, jump on there, and we'll pause regularly throughout the session just to check in and see what questions you've got. So by all means, at any point, whatever's coming into your mind or thoughts or comments you have, use the chat, let us know, and then we will come back to those at regular points. So Emma, I guess let's start off by just having a bit more of a general introduction to kind of your thoughts around growth and fixed mindset. And I guess maybe for people, I'm sure most people on this call are aware of growth mindset and probably the work there from Carol Dweck, but maybe just help them out with kind of getting some practical observations of what we might see between the difference between fixed growth mindsets, and just bring it to life for us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I think, as you mentioned, probably many of you kind of familiar with growth and fixed mindset. Just to really recap that briefly. So, in our kind of definition description of growth mindset, there's kind of two elements. So one, the kind of belief that you can kind of change and grow and develop over time. And there's a kind of second component to it. It's more about how you do that. So it's usually kind of through hard work, practice, effort, and specifically kind of what we call purposeful practice. So not just kind of repeating the same thing, but actually kind of doing something a little bit different every time to kind of stretch yourself. And, there's a strong link between growth mindset and performance in different areas. So, that's usually contrasted with fixed mindset. So if you kind of imagine a continuum, and fixed mindset kind of being the opposite, kind of thinking that your level of competency is pretty fixed. It's kind of informed by your natural level of talent. So typically when people kind of approach things with a fixed mindset, maybe they're a bit less willing to kind of invest effort in improving that. So another kind of key point, or a couple points actually. So most people will have a mix of kind of fixed and growth mindset beliefs in different areas of life. For example, I probably have more of a kind of growth mindset around something like public speaking. So I'm naturally a little bit more kind of introverted, but I think like public speaking is something you can kind of practice and change and get better at over time. But on the opposite end of the scale, kind of anything that requires coordination or sports, I probably have more of a kind of fixed mindset view of. So, I wasn't particularly good at sports at school. So most people do have this kind of mix of fixed and growth mindset in different areas of life. But the really nice thing about mindset is it is something you can kind of change change the way you kind of think about certain things. So if we kind of pull out a few characteristics, I suppose, or things you might observe when you're kind of thinking about mindset. So one key one is actually how you approach new challenges. So if you're doing something new, if you've got a growth mindset about it, you're more likely kind of to embrace the challenge. So just get stuck in, give it a go. You're not too worried about doing it well, the first time that you actually kind of do it. So it's kind of seen as an opportunity to stretch yourself, do something different. On the opposite end of the scale, kind of around kind of fixed mindset, in those new situations, you might be thinking, oh, I don't know whether I'll be good at this. What if I kind of fail and it's terrible, for example? So how you kind of approach new challenges is an indicator of kind of fixed or growth mindset. Another one is around how you approach feedback. So, most of us kind of know that, feedback generally is a good thing, kind of help us learn, maybe can kind of help highlight any kind of blind spots, and, ultimately it can help us improve. But the way we kind of think about feedback also varies depending on our mindset. So if you're kind of in more of a kind of fixed mindset frame, you're thinking that feedback might be a bit kind of challenging or, slightly threatening. It's going to kind of impact my ego, because what if it's not, positive feedback? Does that mean I'm not particularly good at that? So how you react to feedback also varies. So if you're in the growth mindset frame, it's just kind of treated as information that can help you get better at things. So there are a couple ones there. Another interesting one is around humility. I've been kind of thinking about this recently, particularly in a kind of leadership context, and maybe just having in the back of your mind, like different leaders that you kind of seen respond to the coronavirus pandemic and everything that's kind of happening there. So humility in terms of growth mindset is about kind of admitting when you don't know things and being comfortable kind of with not knowing all the answers, and kind of being open to other points of view. So the fact that you actually don't know everything, that you can kind of learn more from other people. On the opposite end of the scale, you've got people or leaders who kind of bluff it in a way. They kind of pretend that they do know everything. And when you're kind of in that frame of mind, it kind of closes down kind of that openness to learning from other people, or kind of actually admitting that you, even in very complex situations, that you actually don't have all the answers. So humility is another interesting indicator there. Yes.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. Again, some great insights, and I loved your description of kind of where sports wasn't your area, where you might be slightly more fit, because I know guaranteed that I have a very fixed mindset about ice skating. I've tried it once, didn't like it. I'm not willing to put the effort in to try and get better at it. I've completely fixed on it. I will never be able to ice skate. So yeah, and I think that's really interesting, because I would consider myself to be somebody who's got quite a strong growth mindset, but there are definitely areas of my, as I've got more aware of this, definitely areas of the way that I think in certain aspects, which I know are absolutely fixed. And yes, I can work on them, but there are some things that actually it's ice skating being one of them that actually I don't want to do the work on. I don't want to develop mindset around it. So.
I think definitely it links to motivation. So is it actually something you want to get better at, or are you pretty comfortable with it? I did actually, we talked about a few kind of indicators there, but I just wanted to kind of quickly show a bit of a model of kind of mindset, because there is kind of a few more. I'll just get to the right page here. A few more indicators around mindset. So as mentioned, people kind of usually just kind of think of fixed versus growth. So the team at Matthew Syed has actually kind of done quite a lot of research to kind of put this model together. And there's different aspects on an individual level. And we've kind of selected kind of 9 key ones. So I've mentioned a couple of them there already. So how do you kind of approach challenges? What's your attitude to feedback? The humility bit. But there's kind of a few other ones in there. So I won't go through those in detail necessarily, but You can kind of have a quick scan there of the slide. So your attitude to failure, curiosity, which Hayden mentioned before, so really key one. So exploring new things, collaboration's definitely a good one. So, that learning from others, so not having all the answers yourself, but kind of being open to different points of view and being challenged. Agility, really important one. I think these days, how we, adapt to change. On the right, we've got also attitude to complexity. Do we kind of look for simple answers, or do we kind of really explore, what are all the things going on that contribute to this situation, and perception of potential? So that belief in actually, can people change and grow, as opposed to this is your kind of natural level of talent. So those are some other aspects of individual mindset as well.
Great, thank you. So Susan just asked a question. So she loves the idea of
Great.
the humility piece, and just wanted us to kind of says that many leaders feel that they have to be on top of everything, and not knowing something shows a weakness. So just
Yes.
expand on this kind of concept around humility in relation to growth mindset a little bit more. So maybe
Mm.
just riff on that a little bit more and dig beneath that
Yeah,
point.
yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I think there does feel like there's that bit of tension there. So it's in my mind, humility is not necessarily the opposite of confidence. So it's kind of choosing the right context to kind of explore that. So you might be able to kind of think of different leaders in the current situation who maybe, or even within organizations, have kind of demonstrated humility. So, I think you can convey confidence in the things that you do know and the direction that you want to go in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are expert in all areas, for example. So, are you willing to kind of bring in people who are more experienced in certain areas? So, scientists, for example, who are kind of more expert in certain areas. So I think as a leader, you can kind of convey the direction you want to go, but also draw on other people who may have more knowledge than you, more expertise than you, kind of take on their points of view as well. So to me, that doesn't kind of necessarily convey weakness as such. And I think people can also kind of see through that sometimes. Like if you're kind of conveying this overly positive picture and over confidence, people can see that, particularly in situations that are just inherently complex, where no one individual can actually have all the answers.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. So you've got these kind of 9 areas that we talked about, and I guess when you introduced earlier, you said that what Matthew Syed Consulting really focusing is this link between kind of growth mindset, but also then performance. So just
Mm-hmm.
talk to us a little bit about what is the correlation between growth mindset and performance, and how does that manifest itself?
Yeah, it's a good one. So, I mean, for us, like, we are interested in growth mindset because of this kind of strong link to performance, and it's been kind of researched in a number of different areas. So, just kind of pull up this one here to talk through that. So, definitely, many of you might be familiar with the work of Dweck. She has researched growth mindset extensively, particularly in the kind of education space. And what is kind of amazing to me is that children as young as 4 actually demonstrate growth or fixed mindset beliefs, and it can influence things like, how willing they are to tackle, kind of challenging puzzles, and how willing they are to kind of persevere with different elements. But what is kind of really actually nice about this is that you can encourage growth mindset in kids. And it's something like in that situation where they're tackling something new, it's something along the lines of, you're really hardworking, I'm sure you can kind of work this out, as opposed to, oh, you're really smart, I'm sure you can work this out. So that kind of focus on effort can actually kind of encourage growth mindset in kids. In terms of, this link to performance, you've also got lots of studies looking at kind of academic performance in secondary schools. So they did, a number of studies kind of showing that link between having growth mindset and actual kind of academic performance. So in something like math, which you might kind of think, oh, that's more about kind of natural ability. So we're definitely not saying that ability is irrelevant, but we're saying that kind of mindset can actually kind of help improve performance. So, they kind of work hand in hand there. So there's this very, very clear link between kind of education, performance, academic performance, and mindset. And that's been researched very extensively. We kind of apply growth mindset to different areas as well. So it's been kind of investigated in the world of sport, for example, kind of a mix of studies and kind of more, I guess, case studies, if you like. So if we kind of look at top sports people, you might be inclined to think, oh, yeah, again, they're just naturally talented, they're a natural at this, etc. But when you kind of talk to them, they focus a lot on, the hours of practice that go into kind of improving certain skills. So kind of, a couple examples of where you might find growth mindset in top sports people. So Michael Jordan is kind of, picked out as one, or David Beckham, for example. I know there's a kind of, I think it's a documentary on Netflix at the moment about Michael Jordan. Haven't actually watched it, but he's held up as a kind of really good example of having growth mindset. Even things like, so if we kind of think about more kind of research studies, some have shown that, like, if you have growth mindset about physical fitness, you're much more likely to exercise in the past and intend to exercise in the future, compared to if you have more fixed mindset beliefs there. So there's some stuff around kind of sports, but the one, the area that we are particularly interested in is that link to work. So there's kind of more and more kind of research in this area. So kind of started off in education, but definitely the idea of growth mindset is being applied to many more areas, and particularly work. So there's a couple studies out there showing things like growth mindset being linked to high levels of trust, great levels of collaboration, and employee commitment as well. So all good things there. And, through our work with, our clients, we've done different case studies and looking at kind of, comparing results kind of before and after. We've put in place different growth mindset programs, and we found, improvements around things like, profitability, increased revenue, increased efficiency, increased productivity. So we've been able to kind of to link that to really kind of hard metrics for organizations as well, which is really nice.
Brilliant. Great to see it across those three different strands. And you mentioned about the Michael Jordan show. I watched The Last Dance, which is the show, and
Yes.
absolutely, the best basketball player who's ever played the game. But as a young child, he struggled in some of when he first started out, and wasn't the best player on his team when he first started, but he really worked hard, and he had an upbringing. Actually, his parents had instilled that mindset in him to work hard. So that was great to see. And that really comes to a question Richard's asked, which is, how can an individual train themselves to move more towards a growth mindset? So we know that from the work that Carol Dweck's done, that we can change. And as you said, the example you gave around the children, but how could we, if I was sat here now, how could I go about kind of helping myself to train myself to have more of a growth mindset?
Yeah, it's really it's a good one, and I guess this is the kind of area that we work on, and we kind of work in two strands, so both at the kind of individual level, but also kind of team level, particularly when we're working with organizations. So I think one of the kind of first steps is basically actually just self-awareness. So once you're kind of aware of this concept of mindset, you kind of start seeing it everywhere. Literally in yourself or your colleagues or leaders in the organization, leaders in the political sphere. So kind of being aware of the concept and kind of recognizing the different areas you do have growth or fixed mindset. So, you might kind of feel it in my more kind of fixed area, you might kind of feel it as a bit of a resistance or being hesitant to take on new challenges, or kind of things that you might kind of feel a bit more kind of risky. So we typically start with the self-awareness bit, not just understand the concept, but the model I showed you earlier, would you actually have a kind of diagnostic around that? So when we're working with organizations, it's usually, we essentially kind of give people this diagnostic. We, give personal individual feedback that might actually come in the form of coaching as well, but also, kind of development tips, particularly around specific areas of mindset. So usually it's not just, okay, I need to get better at growth mindset, but which area of mindset do I need to kind of improve on? And then we've got a whole bunch of kind of initiatives that we use with you know, the organizations we work with, like targeting specific areas. So for example, how do I get better at asking for feedback, for example, because that can kind of feel a bit challenging sometimes, or a bit kind of threatening. So one really nice tip around feedback in particular is actually kind of ask for advice rather than kind of feedback, because that kind of instantly feels less threatening, for example. So you kind of build it into, you know, every day. It's not just a performance review. Like, how can I kind of ask for advice or kind of improvement information more regularly? So feedback to me is actually one critical bit of growth mindset. So that's just kind of one bit. There's a whole host of things. But actually kind of getting better at asking for feedback, making it feel less threatening, and kind of just treating it as information to help you improve, rather than, you know, an evaluation on how good you've done something, is one thing.
Yeah, great tips. And from my experience of when I took the Mindset Advantage diagnostic you referenced earlier, one of the areas that came out for me was the area of attitude to complexity, which is somewhere I felt I was actually very good at, but it came out as one of the areas that I needed to do some work on. And what I understood, and again, it's kind of talking into Richard's question, what I understood from the diagnostic was, because I'm somebody who puts patterns together quite quickly, I tend to make very instinctive decisions on information. And because of that, I don't tend to then do a second pass. So I become quite judgmental because I've already decided what the pattern says, rather than actually really going down into the complexity of it. So it's helped me no end to really develop in that area, because I now know that, yes, I might have my first instinct towards something I'm seeing, but I know I need to do the more work to go and actually understand the things around it, which is where the growth comes. So I think what it's just echoing what you said there, picking out the kind of areas where you've got strengths and areas where you maybe need to do some more work, and then finding ways to work on that to really develop that.
Yeah, I think really nice example there, and kind of also just kind of thinking of, you know, individuals we're going to work with recently as well. So actually kind of working with a bunch of psychologists, and for me, they're actually the kind of most difficult audience in a way, because, you know, you're in kind of the same field, and they should know a lot as well. But actually got a bunch of psychologists to do this as well, and typically they're kind of the most challenging audience in terms of thinking about these assessments, etc. And kind of similar kind of theme there. So it really doing the assessment and getting the report really kind of help with self-awareness. And you know, this particular one person was generally very kind of risk averse. So kind of trying new things, you know, you just spend a lot of time on the analysis. Is this the right thing to do? Or, you know, these are all the reasons that it might not kind of work, sort of thing. But once she also kind of got that kind of feedback around her style, she did start to question, you know, why is it that I'm kind of risk averse? Like, I mean, ultimately, is it because I want to get the right answer the kind of first time round? And that helped with her self-awareness. And she said, actually, just off the back of that, she kind of took away some of those barriers that she was kind of putting up, and was a bit more willing to give things a go without having to, you know, do all the analysis and go all the detail before actually kind of trying it out.
Yeah, again, another great example of when you start to have this self-awareness, the first part, and that's, you know, that's the first part in any personal development, is to understand self. So, and when you get that, it's great to be able to then recognize. So just coming in, we had a question come in from Emily, who's said that luckily her company does feedback really well. However, if feedback isn't part of your culture, it's very hard for others to receive as intended as a growth opportunity. To support this, we've embedded a culture during onboarding, take away any negative connotations, progression based on feedback to encourage requests, manage and leaders actively asking for feedback for their teams, implementing company-wide feedback hour, etc. So some of the things that they've done, which is brilliant. I mean, great
Really
examples for your organization. And I love your tip earlier that you gave about kind of treating feedback more like advice as opposed to asking for feedback, which I think is a really nice way of positioning it. Any other kind of things that you've seen from clients that you work with that have helped to develop more of a growth orientated feedback mechanism as opposed to
the comment just kind of sparked something in my mind. So, you know, there's kind of in our model, there's actually kind of two sets of elements here.
Mm.
And so we talked about the individual side just now, but certainly there's aspects of organizational culture that can really kind of support or hinder growth mindset. So it's not just individual demonstrating growth mindset, but how do these kind of things fit together? So you can kind of probably think of different places you've worked where it does kind of encourage trying things new, but likewise you might have worked in organizations that are a bit more kind of risk averse or bureaucratic, or you need to kind of pass things up the chain before you can kind of try things out. So actually we look at this kind of combination of what's happening with the individual, the team at the team level, and what's happening in the organization, and do they kind of support growth and learning together, or are they kind of slightly misaligned there. So culture obviously is a difficult one to kind of really shift sometimes, but I think it's also kind of being aware of where do you sit at the moment, and does that kind of encourage growth mindset, and what areas do we need to kind of target? Are we kind of truly rewarding trying things out and learning and kind of improving? So the ones we've got in our kind of model and based on our research, a couple different areas. So obviously one kind of big chunk is around do you kind of support innovation and kind of trying new things, which is this fosters innovation and supports risk taking. So if you can kind of imagine maybe as a kind of team you want to try something out, but then what you get instead of all the reasons that it won't work, so that's going to kind of kill that experimentation. Or on the opposite end you've got actually different kind of responses, like, okay, that's kind of really interesting idea, I can see the value on that, let's put together a small trial, how can we actually kind of test this idea out. And another bit to this is actually not all trials work, like how do you actually kind of treat the results. So if it didn't work versus if there's kind of mixed results, or if it was a resounding success. So there's actually still value in what did you learn, even if it didn't kind of work out. So, also we're trying to talk about this link to psychological safety. So many of you might be aware of that. So that's kind of linked to trust as well. So I think also a key to, creating this atmosphere or environment where people can learn is this kind of trust. Like if you do make a mistake or things don't work out, do you feel like you're going to be supported by your manager or the leadership, etc. So it's definitely kind of, cultural element, and what are the kind of practices in the team or the organization that really kind of support the kind of growth mindset and, positive attitude to kind of learning.
Great. Again, some great examples, and we had a question from Sophie there, which was about how can it kind of build an overall culture. So hopefully that's Sophie, that's helped you with that question, and what Emma's just shared has given you these 6 blocks, which certainly in my experience I think really do help support on a cultural level the development of growth mindset. I guess what I'm interested, Emma, to hear as you kind of been talking around this is, when we look at kind of the psychology that sits behind growth mindset, is there something within the psychology that either helps us to develop it, or something that maybe gets in the way from and stops us from having a growth mindset? Are there some kind of whether they're cultural or whether they're individual elements that help us or block us from?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good one, and I think kind of touches on some of the things I've mentioned so far. So I think it is useful kind of to think about where our specific beliefs do come from. So why am I more hesitant to do uh, you know speeches to large groups, for example? Where does that actually kind of come from? Is that because the first time I did it, I absolutely bombed and it was terrible and I don't want to do it again? Why do I avoid numbers or statistics? Is it because at school I was really terrible at math and did badly on tests, for example? So I think, kind of, well, starting with the kind of awareness of the concept and kind of awareness of, which areas you might kind of hold fixed and growth mindset beliefs, then you can kind of start to think about actually, challenge your mindset. Like, why do you actually hold those beliefs? And to your point earlier as well, like, I guess it also depends on how much does that matter to you. Do you actually want to get better at it or not? Like, so I don't have a passion for tennis, so I'm probably not going to invest that much time in becoming better at tennis, for example. But if it is something that you think is important, it's going to kind of help with your development or your career, or kind of get you where you want to be. Kind of challenge the mindset, kind of think about why do I actually kind of hold those beliefs. And in some of the kind of coaching work that we do, it does start a lot with your kind of attitudes and beliefs. It's not just the behaviors, but like, how does your mindset actually kind of influence your behaviors ultimately? Does it stop you from doing things? Does it kind of hold you back? Are you much more hesitant? Are you much more kind of risk averse in some sort of areas? So I think kind of starting with your beliefs and attitudes, recognizing where you do hold different ones, that's a good start.
Yeah, great. Definitely, it's that whole concept of limiting beliefs sitting at the heart of the way that we act. And you mentioned earlier about that ability has a part to play.
Yeah.
So can you just talk a little bit about that? Because my understanding of this is often some of the most talented people can sometimes have some of the strongest fixed mindsets, and sometimes they might
Yeah.
then fulfill that ability that they have.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and particularly with fix as well. There's kind of maybe kind of two main streams. So that you think you are not good enough, so you don't kind of put the effort in. And then the other type of kind of fixed mindset is actually where you think you are really good at it. And you don't want any information that will kind of prove you otherwise. So you think you are the smartest in the room. Definitely don't want to put yourself in a situation where you might get contrary information. And actually kind of, thinking about a specific example. So, we work with different law firms, for example, and partners. And obviously, this group highly educated, they've done very well, they've progressed in the organization. But you can definitely see a lot of fixed mindset there, because they're kind of in the situation where they kind of work their way up. They've always got kind of really, I guess, positive feedback in different ways. But they're a bit more hesitant to put themselves out there and kind of try something new and different in case it doesn't work, because that would kind of conflict with their identity, I suppose, of being really great and really successful. So that's really kind of interesting one. So it's not necessarily kind of correlated with actual performance, even if you're objectively, I suppose, or by certain standards, a high performer. You can definitely still have fixed mindset beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff. So Richard's just come in with a question. He says, I'm terrible at numbers too. So maybe there's something in that opening sentence that we need to work on. But sometimes I find myself procrastinating towards a harder task and hesitating. What would I need to do to prevent that kind of fixed mindset?
Oh, that's a good one. Because definitely a kind of mindset is linked to motivation. And procrastination, as you kind of mentioned there. So if, again, you kind of, I think, when you think about procrastination, sometimes you build the tasks up in your mind that it's just kind of bigger than it is. And there's some research about kind of mood as well. So often we kind of take our mood or how we're kind of feeling about something as an indicator that I don't really need to do it. But actually the advice is, I don't know how easy it is to implement, but just go do it. So if you kind of, example is like, exercise, like not everyone finds that pleasant, but kind of, okay, I need to go out for a walk for an hour. Like, oh, I don't really kind of feel like doing it. But the advice is kind of ignore your mood as such and just, step out the door. And once you're kind of out there and doing it, you find it kind of more enjoyable. So I'm not going to say that you're going to find working with numbers enjoyable, but and the other kind of tip is actually start small. So break it down. If it kind of feels like a really kind of big task or big decision, what's the very first step that you need to do? So really break it down, and like even just do 15 minutes on something to get started. So a couple of small things, to just break it down into something smaller, more manageable, and just get started. And once you're kind of off, then I think you're just more likely to keep going.
Yeah, it's that bank those quick wins. So if you commit to doing an hour's walking a day and you fail, then you reinforce that fixed mindset. Whereas if you say, I'm going to do 5 minutes, and you do
Yeah,
that 5 minutes and then you build it to 6, then you're building the
yeah.
success, and therefore the growth comes that way.
And another one, actually, probably more in a work situation or possibly a personal one, is actually make a public commitment. Tell someone that you're going to do this. So you kind of not just accountable to yourself, but to other people. So that can be motivating as well, because you don't want to turn up and say, oh, I didn't do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great one for holding yourself to account, making that public declaration. Good stuff. So again, some great examples, and hopefully, Richard, that's helped with kind of the numbers side too. And you hear so many people who just say, I can't do numbers.
Mm,
And it
yeah,
stops them even trying is I just can't do numbers. Well, okay, you probably can if we, let's say, start small and break it down and start with simple things and build up from there. So we
yeah,
hear that language a
exactly.
lot. So maybe it'd be helpful for everybody if, because we talked a lot about kind of individuals, talked about businesses, and we kind of talked about some of the impacts that it can have in the work mode. But maybe
Mm.
could you share with us kind of from one of your examples with a client that you've worked with, some of the things you've done with them, and maybe give us a bit of a case study about how you've identified their mindset, worked with them, and what
Yep.
it's led to. Maybe give people a bit of a flavour as to
Yeah,
what this can do.
definitely. Yeah, so we work with, I think quite a broad set of organizations around kind of mindset. So as diverse as, NHS trusts, policing, professional services, mentioned kind of law firms before. So, um, kind of whole host of different types of organizations. And so typically, for us, in terms of what we do, we're usually working with leadership teams, and we often do kind of group level type interventions or development activities. So often we are starting with, that self-awareness bit, starting with our kind of diagnostic around mindset, providing individual feedback, sometimes one-to-one coaching. That can be really kind of effective in terms of challenging individual beliefs and mindset. So it's not just on you as an individual, but getting, support from another person to really kind of highlight those areas where you hold different mindset beliefs. And usually we're using the kind of diagnostic, and we look at it at a team level as well, and we look at the all culture aspects, and we look at how they work together. So typically we've been doing kind of workshops, lots of virtual workshops now these days, targeting different areas. So actually, if agility is an area that the group are maybe not so great at. Maybe they're really kind of focused on the process, etc., but they're not kind of moving, implementing things fast. We might do kind of workshop based on that. And typically we're working with people across the space of at least a year. So self-awareness, different interventions, but also key is measuring change as well. So we do things like pulse surveys to kind of see, what behaviors have kind of shifted over time, for example. And, for specific clients, sometimes we do kind of before and after comparison. So I've got one case study that I've got a couple slides on. So I'll talk about this one. As well here. So so you can kind of see from the slides was NHS trust and one particular kind of department. And if I didn't know what it endoscopy was, you can pronounce it right, before, but it's basically kind of procedure where they have a long thin tube with a camera on the end. They kind of have a look at your insides. Their particular challenge, won't elaborate on that too much, their particular challenge was actually demand for these procedures had doubled in a 5-year period. So not just for these guys, but kind of across the UK. So much more work. And people were basically kind of working on, they were working 7 days essentially, and also more early shifts and late shifts to try to deal with the demand, and actually outsourcing a bunch of the procedures as well to kind of private providers. So obviously that came at a cost as well. And that was also having an impact on engagement. So massive demands, people working very, very hard, additional costs for the NHS. So that was, one of the specific challenges that they wanted to address. So what you've got on the kind of left-hand side is more or less what we did with them. So they kind of recognized that they wanted to do something different. And a couple of things that we did with them is actually kind of do this development program, obviously kind of focused on growth mindset and learning cultures with them. So, with managers, but also kind of staff were engaged in the overall process as well. We had some online learning content for them as well that tends to be quite bite-sized and kind of multimedia to help make it easier for people to take in. But one of the kind of key things is this kind of marginal gains methodology. So it's essentially a kind of continuous improvement type methodology. So it's this kind of mix of thinking about individual mindset, but also putting in place practices that kind of make it easier for people to kind of live the kind of principles behind growth mindset. So marginal gains is about kind of continuous improvement, kind of really breaking down a problem and looking at each of the areas and like, what are small improvements that we can make to each of these things. So if you can kind of make the tagline is like, if you can kind of make 1% improvements in everything you do, that's going to add up to quite a bit impact. And these guys had some really nice results, which you kind of can see on the right hand side there. So they had a look at different metrics and kind of across a 18-month period. So a nice one was this kind of increase in productivity. So this kind of 44% increase there. So they're actually kind of able to do more procedures, and that was down to partly at least to improving things around kind of communication and organization. So they kind of apply the marginal gains methodology to those elements, and that led to quite a big improvement. So this 44% increase. The next one, the 3%, on the face of it kind of looks relatively small. So this increase in overall output. But what's impressive about this is that they kind of moved from a 7-day working week to a 5-day working week, and they still had this kind of 3% increase. So that's nice. And the last two things on here around this kind of increase in plant utilization. So they've got all this kind of equipment that they use. So actually they kind of improved how efficiently they were using the different equipment, so they can ultimately kind of get more done and get more procedures done. So what all of this kind of meant was that they can actually kind of do more procedures in less time, and they didn't have to outsource as many procedures to the kind of private providers. So this is, when you kind of add it all up, this led to a kind of 6-figure cost saving. And obviously, staff were having to not work 7 days a week, and kind of reverting to this 5 days a week. So also, you've got that human element to it as well. So staff morale was actually kind of better. So I quite like this case study. It's really nice, very kind of concrete outputs and positive kind of impact on individuals. So this kind of mix of making people aware of their mindset and giving them kind of methodologies to kind of apply growth mindset can be really powerful, and obviously can kind of lead to really concrete improvements and outcomes.
Yeah, you're right. Again, I love the case study you shared and the process that you went through, because whenever we talk about growth mindset, it can sometimes feel a bit conceptual, and this really brings it into solid, tangible improvements that come on the back of it, which I absolutely love. So I've got a great question coming from Susan, which says, how do you deal with a CEO who can't be persuaded that they have a fixed mindset and learning effectively? So how do you deal with those people who may be the decision makers who themselves have got a fixed mindset?
Yeah, that is a challenging one. I won't lie there. Certainly come across that before, and it can have a big impact, to be honest. So typically we are kind of working with kind of leadership teams, and they might report into the CEO, for example. So sometimes the CEO efforts or way of thinking can influence things. So in those kind of situations, well, they might not take it on, but like, you kind of might recommend kind of one-on-one coaching. But also I think the thing is actually demonstrating the results of some of these initiatives. So, if you kind of think growth mindset is a bit fluffy or touchy-feely, actually, link it to something that they care about. So again, with this, I suppose we tried to link to, what are the strategic objectives? What do you actually want to achieve as a business? How will this help you kind of get there ultimately? So do that, but if clients are willing to at least kind of give it a go and do a bit of a small pilot at least, and you can kind of show results, and that can be compelling. And for us, we also kind of have these kind of case studies to show that it's not just a fluffy concept, but can actually lead to positive results as well.
Yeah, it's a good a good way of tackling, to like focus on those the difference maker and what's their biggest challenge in their business, and then using the information around growth mindset to talk about how the mindsets might be impacting the challenges they have. Because what you really want is just, as you say, that willingness to just give it a go, to try something, even if it's a small pilot, to improve the concept back to people. So yeah, definitely a great point. Adam is just making a comment there as we come in. Interesting case study. I'd imagine trust then builds between frontline and management, opening up further opportunities to address other pinch points together. So, building on those early gains that you've had, and then working from there to build out even more opportunities is kind of what Adam's expecting.
Yeah, definitely. And for this, when we kind of think about the culture, we do also kind of think about that psychological safety, just having that kind of open, trusting kind of communication between all levels. And the other thing we link it to is actually kind of diversity of thought, which Matthew also kind of writes about. So, if you have and all the leadership teams thinking the same way, is that a bit of kind of group thing? Could you bring in different voices, and voices that have different opinions from different levels or different functions, whatever it is, and that will typically kind of help you have a better understanding of what is the situation, what are the challenges, and actually kind of richer ideas for solutions as well. So having that kind of open communication, those kind of trusting relationships definitely help with coming to better solution for challenges.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Yeah, some good thoughts there. So we've only got about 10 minutes left. So if anybody's got any more questions, please do get them onto the chat, and we'd love to hear what Emma's got to say about those. So got a few minutes left, so do ping those in. So I've got a question for you, Emma. So
yeah,
you referenced earlier about kind of leaders in the current climate, but I guess I'm more interested generally about when we're in times of crisis like we currently are. Does that mean that we see more fixed mindsets, or do we see more growth mindsets? So what was your view, and what are you perhaps seeing and hearing from your research that when you're at times of crisis?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think in times of challenge, it's kind of just exacerbates it or makes it clearer. So if you're kind of maybe slightly oriented to growth mindset already, it just makes it kind of clearer, and the same with fix. So in terms of the clients we work with, we're kind of really seeing a diverse range of responses here. So one I think quite nice outcome is perhaps like, we are pretty much in the same boat, and lots of people have had to kind of adapt very quickly, so either as individuals, so converting to working from home, or to kind of convert operations very quickly. So a simple example is like converting from a contact center that's kind of in person to virtual. So lots of organizations have had to do that, for example, and maybe they've talked about that for years, but the situation has actually kind of meant that they've had to do it really quickly. And that's actually really challenged people's way of thinking. So instead of bringing up all the kind of barriers that you had the kind of opportunity to do previously, in a way you don't have the choice now. So, but what that has demonstrated to people is that you can actually do it. And you kind of hear people talk about, well, okay, it was challenging, we were able to do it. And actually kind of, I was listening to a talk the other day, and it was about kind of the acceleration of just digital ways of working, and they basically said that the situation has accelerated that by 3 to 5 years, which is kind of amazing, right? So on one hand, I think you've got some people, some organizations kind of really showed that you can change and adapt in a very short space of time. But likewise, you've got organizations that are really struggling, or teams that are really struggling as well. And when think about the whole kind of economic situation coming up, but maybe kind of previously, again, they were kind of very, very traditional, very, very bureaucratic. So maybe they found it more difficult to kind of adapt actually in this situation. So, the things that have worked for them before, maybe not necessarily kind of working now. So actually, to me, it kind of points out that actually they would benefit massively from kind of developing more of a kind of growth mindset, putting in place things that would help them adapt and kind of try things new to make sure that they can continue to survive and thrive basically in the new situation. So we've seen a real range of responses, to be honest. I think the situation is just kind of, because it is challenging, because it is complex, because it's ambiguous, it's just kind of really highlighted the areas that do have more kind of fixed or growth beliefs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's amplified what's already there in the environment. So yeah, I definitely personally have seen that in some of the clients I work with and some of the people around me as well. So yeah, great stuff. So Susan's asked another question, which is, do you find groupthink idea is more or less common within law firms? In my experience, which is limited, they seem to be an interesting group who could benefit hugely from the Rebel Ideas work around cognitive diversity. So what are your thoughts around, and maybe it's law firms specifically, or maybe do we tend to see this kind of certain sectors having a kind of a groupthink kind of methodology?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because we do actually kind of work with several law firms, and again, even within that, you see quite a range of responses there. So I think maybe kind of based on training or the way they're kind of set up, like most people are very risk averse, right? So it's very kind of procedural, and this is the way to do things. You're taught to be, you're really smart if you can kind of do this. But likewise, with some organizations we work with, they've actually been put up for innovation awards, for example. So ones that have really kind of embrace growth mindset and different methodologies that kind of sit behind that. And one I'm thinking of actually kind of, I think they also kind of applied this marginal gains methodology, and they changed literally one process, and it had quite big cost savings, and they actually kind of use this kind of case study as part of the reward they were going up for around kind of innovation. So I think maybe there is these kind of cultural bits and how people are trained and rewarded in order to be able to kind of work in the industry. But even within the industry, you definitely kind of see a kind of continuum in terms of growth and fixed.
Yeah, great. Good examples. So we're just coming up towards the end of our session. So again, if anybody has any final questions for Emma this morning, then do please jump onto chat right now and get those in. Emma, whilst people are just kind of thinking about final questions, where can people find out more about yourself, get in contact with you, maybe learn more about kind of Mindset Advantage and the whole kind of growth mindset work that you're doing? So if people are where they can get hold of you.
Yeah, sure. So essentially the kind of Matthew Syed consulting website. So it's www.matthewsyed, so with a double T there, .co.uk. And what we do have on the website, we've got more case studies, definitely. We've got more about our Mindset Advantage tool, which is the growth mindset kind of diagnostic. And we have actually kind of some thought leadership pieces, essentially. So we write on different topics like humility and leadership or innovation. So there's some more kind of thought leadership pieces on the website as well. So definitely lots of stuff there to have a look at if you're kind of interested in learning a bit more about kind of growth mindset and the different aspects.
Perfect. Yeah, great stuff. Absolutely. And I say our business mindset leadership has been working with Matthew Syed as well. So again, if you want to talk to us about it as well, we'd be happy to have a conversation. But Emma, it's been really great. I really appreciate your time this morning. Been some great questions come in. So thank you to everybody who's been on the call so far this morning. Really really good to have you here and really appreciate your input and involvement. So do please touch base with Emma, get in touch and find out more. Just a quick one before everybody jumps off the call, just to make you aware, we have got our online facilitation bootcamp, which starts on the 25th of June. That's with our good friend Richard, who's on the call today. He'll be taking you through those 3 sessions of the bootcamp. If you are want to know more about how to facilitate great sessions online in this current environment. So just to make you aware, if you go over to our Brain Food on community on LinkedIn, you can find all the details, all the links to sign up if you want to get involved in that online facilitation bootcamp. So once again, really appreciate everybody for joining us today. Wonderful to see you all. Great to see you again joining and supporting this community through getting involved in these in conversation sessions. And Emma, I just want to say a final thank you very much for your time this morning. The information has been brilliant, really brought kind of growth mindset, certainly for me, to life in terms of how it can make I think the tangible difference in places. The case study that you left us with was such a great example of the difference it can make. So thank you for your time, and it's great to see you again.
Thank you all. Thanks for listening in.
Thanks, guys. So take care, keep well, and we'll look forward to welcoming you on our next session, hopefully with Richard on our bootcamp, but if not, on our next In Conversation with. So look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.